Have you ever noticed that the moments you withdraw your energy are the very moments the world suddenly starts chasing you? That when a woman stops speaking, people finally begin to listen, and when she stops trying to be understood, she becomes impossible to ignore. What if I told you that silence is not weakness, but the purest expression of power a woman can ever hold? Stay with me, because by the end of this message, you will realize something life-changing. You were never meant to chase. You were always meant to attract. You are a queen. It's time you start acting like one. Silence, the language of the self-mastered woman. Silence has a way of revealing a woman to herself, not the silence that comes from fear or avoidance or suppression, but the kind of silence that feels like finally exhaling after years of holding your breath. It is the silence where you sit with yourself long enough to hear the difference between your own voice and the echoes of everything the world told you to be. This silence is not empty. It is full of answers you were too distracted to hear, full of truths you were too overwhelmed to recognize, full of guidance you were too busy explaining your pain to ever follow. Most women are taught to speak, to justify, to defend, to fix, to soothe, to carry conversations that were never meant to be theirs. But a self-mastered woman discovers something quietly revolutionary, that her silence holds more power than her explanations ever did. Because silence isn't the absence of words. Silence is the presence of inner knowing. When a woman becomes silent, she begins to observe, not from insecurity, but from clarity, not to retreat, but to rise, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. She starts to notice the energy behind people's intentions. She notices how someone's tone reveals far more than their language. She senses the truth behind what is not said. She sees where people show up and where they disappear. She becomes aware of what drains her, what nourishes her, what pulls her backward, what calls her forward. And in that noticing, something powerful happens. She stops reacting, because silence teaches her what noise never could. That she is not obligated to respond to everything that reaches for her. She is not required to participate in every battle, nor heal every person who refuses to heal themselves. Silence becomes her filter, her shield, her sanctuary. And as she sits in that quiet space, a realization dawns on her like dawn. Not every voice deserves access to my peace. This understanding is not bitter, it is liberating. It finally makes sense why her soul felt tired, why her spirit felt stretched, why her energy felt scattered. She had been speaking into spaces that were not built to receive her. She had been offering clarity to people committed to misunderstanding her. She had been pouring into broken containers and calling it love. So she steps back, she breathes, she listens. And in the stillness, she hears a truth rising from within. I no longer need to be everywhere. I only need to be where I am valued. And this is where her transformation begins. In the quiet, in the stillness, in the soft refusal to be drained by what does not honor her. Because silence, when chosen consciously, does not close a woman. It crowns her. It turns her from reactive to intentional, from exhausted to empowered, from scattered to aligned. And just when she thinks this is the end of her lesson, silence whispers something deeper. There is even more freedom waiting for you. When you stop explaining yourself, and this leads her into the next awakening. 2. When you stop explaining, you start evolving. There comes a moment in a woman's life when she grows tired of handing out reasons like flowers, tired of offering explanations to people who only listen to argue, tired of sharing her truth with those who twist it for their convenience. Something shifts inside her, a quiet yet uncompromising resolve. I no longer owe anyone a tour through my soul. It is not arrogance, it is evolution. Because every time she explained herself, she traded a piece of her power for temporary peace. She traded her clarity for someone else's comfort. She traded her intuition for their approval. But explanations seldom heal what silence can solve. And she begins to understand that the more she tries to justify her decisions, the more she trains others to believe that her choices require their permission. So she chooses something different. She chooses stillness. She chooses privacy. She chooses peace. She stops explaining why she walked away, because anyone who forced her to the edge already knows why. She stops explaining why she needs space, because those who love her will feel it before she ever says it. She stops explaining why she no longer tolerates the things she once accepted, because evolution doesn't owe familiarity a warning. She stops explaining her boundaries, because boundaries are not debates, they are declarations. And something incredible happens when she stops explaining. She feels lighter, as if all the weight she carried was not her truth, but the expectation that she must translate herself for others. She also becomes more confident, because confidence is simply the absence of self-doubt, forced on her by people who benefited from her confusion. And slowly, she realizes something profound. The moment I stop explaining myself, I start hearing myself more clearly. Her intuition becomes sharper, her decisions become stronger, her direction becomes clearer. She stops trying to be understood and instead focuses on understanding herself. She stops trying to convince others and instead commits to her own alignment. This shift is powerful, almost spiritual, arising from the inside out. And with every silent choice she makes, her life begins to reorganize around her peace. But just when she believes she has mastered herself, another truth emerges from the silence. To fully evolve, you must also learn how to redirect your energy. And this is where the next lesson unfolds. 3. The power of withdrawing your energy from chaos. Withdrawing your energy is not abandonment. Withdrawing your energy is alignment. It is the quiet recognition that not every situation deserves your presence. Not every argument deserves your passion. Not every person deserves your access. A woman who learns to withdraw her energy learns the true meaning of freedom. Because chaos can only exist where energy is supplied. The moment she stops feeding it, it collapses under its own emptiness. Think of how many times she kept giving, kept trying, kept explaining, kept showing up for people who would not even meet her halfway. She poured and poured and poured until she was exhausted, but they were still unfulfilled. Chaos is greedy like that. It takes endlessly and gives nothing in return. But something changes when she steps back. When she stops fighting battles that only drain her. When she refuses to carry emotions that are not hers. When she no longer responds to every insult, every misunderstanding, every projection thrown her way. She withdraws, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Because energy is the currency of life. And she finally understands the value of her own. The moment she withdraws her energy from chaos, peace rushes in like a tide reclaiming the shore. She feels herself returning to herself. Her mind becomes quiet, her emotions become steady, her intuition becomes unmistakably clear. In this stillness, she learns something beautiful. Not everything that invites me deserves a reply. Not everything that touches me deserves to stay. Chaos loses its power over her. People who once controlled her through urgency suddenly lose access. Situations that once triggered now have no effect. Drama that once consumed her becomes invisible. She has learned the sacred art of detachment, not the cold kind, but the kind rooted in self-respect. And that is the moment her life begins to shift, because withdrawing energy does not just protect her, it transforms her. It makes her lighter, it makes her calmer, it makes her stronger. Most importantly, it gives her the space to stop focusing on the noise outside and start awakening the voice within. And right when she thinks this is the end of her growth, life offers her one more whisper. Silence, self-respect, and energy control are only the beginning. The real transformation is what happens next. And that is where the next evolution begins. 1. Silence, the language of the self-mastered woman. Silence has a way of revealing a woman to herself, not the silence that comes from fear or avoidance or suppression, but the kind of silence that feels like finally exhaling after years of holding your breath. It is the silence where you sit with yourself long enough to hear the difference between your own voice and the echoes of everything the world told you to be. This silence is not empty. It is full of answers you were too distracted to hear, full of truths you were too overwhelmed to recognize, full of guidance you were too busy explaining your pain to ever follow. Most women are taught to speak, to justify, to defend, to fix, to soothe, to carry conversations that were never meant to be theirs. But a self-mastered woman discovers something quietly revolutionary, that her silence holds more power than her explanations ever did. Because silence isn't the absence of words. Silence is the presence of inner knowing. When a woman becomes silent, she begins to observe, not from insecurity, but from clarity. Not to retreat, but to rise, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. She starts to notice the energy behind people's intentions. She notices how someone's tone reveals far more than their language. She senses the truth behind what is not said. She sees where people show up and where they disappear. She becomes aware of what trains her, what nourishes her, what pulls her backward, what calls her forward. And in that noticing, something powerful happens. She stops reacting, because silence teaches her what noise never could, that she is not obligated to respond to everything that reaches for her. She is not required to participate in every battle, nor heal every person who refuses to heal themselves. Silence becomes her filter, her shield, her sanctuary. And as she sits in that quiet space, a realization dawns on her like dawn. Not every voice deserves access to my peace. This understanding is not bitter, it is liberating. It finally makes sense why her soul felt tired, why her spirit felt stretched, why her energy felt scattered. She had been speaking into spaces that were not built to receive her. She had been offering clarity to people committed to misunderstanding her. She had been pouring into broken containers and calling it love. So she steps back, she breathes, she listens, and in the stillness, she hears a truth rising from within. I no longer need to be everywhere. I only need to be where I am valued. And this is where her transformation begins. In the quiet, in the stillness, in the soft refusal to be drained by what does not honor her. Because silence, when chosen consciously, does not close a woman. It crowns her. It turns her from reactive to intentional, from exhausted to empowered, from scattered to aligned. And just when she thinks this is the end of her lesson, silence whispers something deeper. There is even more freedom waiting for you. When you stop explaining yourself, and this leads her into the next awakening. 2. When you stop explaining, you start evolving. There comes a moment in a woman's life when she grows tired of handing out reasons like flowers, tired of offering explanations to people who only listen to argue, tired of sharing her truth with those who twist it for their convenience. Something shifts inside her, a quiet yet uncompromising resolve. I no longer owe anyone a tour through my soul. It is not arrogance, it is evolution. Because every time she explained herself, she traded a piece of her power for temporary peace. She traded her clarity for someone else's comfort. She traded her intuition for their approval. But explanations seldom heal what silence can solve. And she begins to understand that the more she tries to justify her decisions, the more she trains others to believe that her choices require their permission. So she chooses something different. She chooses stillness, she chooses privacy, she chooses peace. She stops explaining why she walked away, because anyone who forced her to the edge already knows why. She stops explaining why she needs space, because those who love her will feel it before she ever says it. She stops explaining why she no longer tolerates the things she once accepted, because evolution doesn't owe familiarity a warning. She stops explaining her boundaries, because boundaries are not debates, they are declarations. And something incredible happens when she stops explaining. She feels lighter, as if all the weight she carried was not her truth, but the expectation that she must translate herself for others. She also becomes more confident, because confidence is simply the absence of self-doubt, forced on her by people who benefited from her confusion. And slowly, she realizes something profound. The moment I stop explaining myself, I start hearing myself more clearly. Her intuition becomes sharper, her decisions become stronger, her direction becomes clearer. She stops trying to be understood and instead focuses on understanding herself. She stops trying to convince others and instead commits to her own alignment. This shift is powerful, almost spiritual, arising from the inside out. And with every silent choice she makes, her life begins to reorganize around her peace. But just when she believes she has mastered herself, another truth emerges from the silence. To fully evolve, you must also learn how to redirect your energy. And this is where the next lesson unfolds. 3. The power of withdrawing your energy from chaos. Withdrawing your energy is not abandonment. Withdrawing your energy is alignment. It is the quiet recognition that not every situation deserves your presence. Not every argument deserves your passion. Not every person deserves your access. A woman who learns to withdraw her energy learns the true meaning of freedom, because chaos can only exist where energy is supplied. The moment she stops feeding it, it collapses under its own emptiness. Think of how many times she kept giving, kept trying, kept explaining, kept showing up for people who would not even meet her halfway. She poured and poured and poured until she was exhausted, but they were still unfulfilled. Chaos is greedy like that. It takes endlessly and gives nothing in return. But something changes when she steps back, when she stops fighting battles that only drain her, when she refuses to carry emotions that are not hers, when she no longer responds to every insult, every misunderstanding, every projection thrown her way. She withdraws, not out of fear, but out of wisdom, because energy is the currency of life, and she finally understands the value of her own. The moment she withdraws her energy from chaos, peace rushes in like a tide reclaiming the shore. She feels herself returning to herself. Her mind becomes quiet. Her emotions become steady. Her intuition becomes unmistakably clear. In this stillness, she learns something beautiful. Not everything that invites me deserves a reply. Not everything that touches me deserves to stay. Chaos loses its power over her. People who once controlled her through urgency suddenly lose access. Situations that once triggered her now have no effect. Drama that once consumed her becomes invisible. She has learned the sacred art of detachment, not the cold kind, but the kind rooted in self-respect. And that is the moment her life begins to shift. Because withdrawing energy does not just protect her. It transforms her. It makes her lighter. It makes her calmer. It makes her stronger. Most importantly, it gives her the space to stop focusing on the noise outside and start awakening the voice within. And right when she thinks this is the end of her growth, life offers her one more whisper. Silence, self-respect, and energy control are only the beginning. The real transformation is what happens next. And that is where the next evolution begins. 4. Why distance creates clarity. For you and for them, distance is not a punishment. Distance is a lens. When a woman steps back even a little, something powerful happens. The fog around her life begins to lift. It's strange how closeness can blur our vision. How constant interaction can make us overlook things that were always there. How giving too much access to the wrong people can distort what we believe, what we see, and even what we feel. But the moment she creates distance, emotional, mental, or physical, the picture shifts. Slowly at first, then all at once, she begins to see people for who they are, not for who she hoped they could be. She starts recognizing patterns she once excused. She notices the truth hidden beneath their behaviors. She sees the uneven exchanges, the quiet betrayals, the unspoken expectations she once ignored. Distance becomes her mirror, reflecting back what connection hid. And in that reflection, she confronts something she once feared: that not everyone was meant to stay close, that not everyone who reached for her had pure intentions, that some hearts only felt warm because she kept lighting their fire. With distance, she sees clearly. She sees herself clearly too. She realizes how often she made herself small to keep peace. How many times she quieted her truth to avoid conflict. How frequently she abandoned her own needs to meet the needs of others. She sees the imbalance. She sees the self-neglect. She sees the quiet sacrifices that drained her piece by piece. And then something shifts inside her, gently but firmly. A truth rises within her like a tide she can no longer deny. I deserve connections that don't require me to disappear. This realization is not loud. It is soft, steady, grounded. A calm awakening that flows through her spirit like a warm wind. She begins to understand that distance is not the end of connection. Sometimes it's the beginning of the right one, because distance reveals who moves closer with intention and who slips away with ease. It reveals who values her presence and who only valued her usefulness. It reveals who notices her absence and who was never really paying attention at all. Distance does not push people out of her life. Distance reveals who truly belongs in it. And as she reflects on this, a deeper truth emerges, the kind of clarity that only solitude can bring. Because distance doesn't only expose others, it reveals her inner landscape too. Her desires, her boundaries, her emotional thresholds, her limits, her needs, her calling. And for the first time, E realizes that clarity is not something she finds. It is something she creates. By stepping away from the noise that drowned her, she grows more centered, more grounded, more aligned. And with that clarity, she begins to focus inward. But in that clarity, a quiet whisper emerges, a whisper guiding her into the next truth. Clarity is powerful, but what you focus on next is what reshapes your entire life. And this leads her into the next unfolding. 5. Focusing on yourself reorganizes your entire world. When clarity arrives, it doesn't ask her to move outward, it calls her inward. She begins to turn her attention toward herself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. Because for the first time, she understands that her life expands only in the direction of her focus. So she starts choosing herself in ways she once feared. She pours into her emotional well-being. She nurtures her inner strength. She invests in her healing. She honors the quiet instincts that once whispered beneath her fear. She begins to feel the weight of her own presence, as if meeting herself again after years of separation. She begins to realize that focusing on herself is not about building walls. It is about building alignment. Because when she focuses on herself, she stops seeking value from places that have none to give. She stops needing validation from voices that don't understand her. She stops chasing closure from people who were never honest with her in the first place. Instead, she starts nurturing the spaces within her that deserve attention. She starts watering her dreams. She starts honoring her boundaries. She starts protecting her peace like it's the most sacred treasure she owns. And quietly, something miraculous begins to happen. Her world rearranges itself around her new vibration. People who once took her for granted no longer have access. Situations that drained her lose their grip. Opportunities that once felt distant begin to approach her. Her energy becomes magnetic, not because she is trying, but because she is aligned. When she focuses on herself, she stops living by default and starts living by intention. She becomes more selective about who enters her space. She becomes more protective of her time. She becomes more aware of her emotional capacity. She becomes more devoted to her purpose. Her standards rise, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She starts to realize that peace is not a destination. Peace is a daily decision, a lifestyle, a posture, a form of self-love. And the more she focuses on growth, the more she outgrows what once held her down. Her priorities shift, her desires evolve, her path changes. But the most beautiful part, her soul becomes quieter, clearer, calmer. And in that calmness, she sees a deeper truth. Focusing on yourself doesn't just change how you feel, it changes what you allow. This is the moment where everything she once accepted no longer fits who she is becoming. She sees that her growth demands new boundaries, new standards, new levels of emotional self-respect. But just as she starts to embrace this transformation, life reveals one more deeply powerful lesson. Self-focus gives you clarity, but silence gives others the chance to reveal themselves. And so she steps into the next truth. 6. Silence forces others to face their own behavior. There is something almost mystical about silence. It has a way of confronting people without a single word spoken. When she becomes silent, when she no longer defends herself, no longer engages in chaos, no longer reacts to manipulation, no longer entertains disrespect, people begin to feel the weight of their own actions. Her silence becomes a mirror, a reflection, a truth they can no longer escape. Because silence removes the distraction of her voice and forces them to hear their own. Some begin to reflect, some begin to regret, some begin to explain themselves to themselves. Some begin to recognize the wounds they tried to bury inside her. Some begin to see how they mishandled her presence, misread her spirit, misused her kindness. And others, the ones who relied on her reactions to validate themselves, suddenly feel powerless. Because silence takes away the power they held over her. It takes away their ability to drain her. It takes away their access to her emotional energy. Her silence becomes the boundary. She never had to speak. And slowly, she sees the truth. People's responses to her silence reveal who they really are. Those who care rise with respect. Those who were genuine move closer with clarity. Those who once took her for granted now feel her absence like an echo. And those who were never meant for her fade away into their own noise. Silence does not punish. Silence reveals. It reveals their patterns. It reveals their intentions. It reveals their capacity to love. It reveals their willingness to grow. It reveals who they are without the comfort of her constant presence. And in this revelation, she receives the closure she could never have found through conversation, because silence never lies. Silence does what explanations cannot. It heals what confrontation cannot. It protects what vulnerability cannot. It exposes what intuition already knew. And as she grows deeper into this silent strength, she realizes something powerful. My silence is not empty. It's full of truth, and that truth becomes her new compass. But deep within her quiet confidence, a final whisper rises. A whisper that carries the next stage of her evolution. If silence can reveal so much, imagine the transformation waiting when you fully rise into your inner power. And this is where the next awakening begins. 7. Self-prioritization, the highest form of respect. There comes a moment in every woman's journey when she finally understands something life tried to teach her again and again. You honor others most when you stop dishonoring yourself. Self-prioritization is not selfishness. It is the purest form of self-respect. It is the moment you decide that your needs matter. Your peace matters. Your energy matters. Your inner world matters. For years, she may have placed herself last without even noticing. She gave her time freely. She gave her patience generously. She gave her understanding endlessly. And though it made her kind, it also slowly drained her. Because every time she ignored her own needs to keep someone else comfortable, she taught them, silently, that her comfort came second, that her worth was flexible, that her boundaries were optional. But the day she chooses to prioritize herself, everything begins to shift. She starts listening to the quiet signals inside her that she once pushed aside. She notices when her body feels tired, when her emotions feel overwhelmed, when her intuition feels uneasy. She no longer forces herself into spaces that drain her just to look strong. She no longer maintains conversations that feel heavy just to seem polite. She no longer carries responsibilities that aren't hers just to be accepted. She begins to honor her limits. She begins to protect her peace. She begins to create space for her healing. She begins to treat her time as sacred, her rest as necessary, and her heart as valuable. This shift is subtle, but life-changing. People around her start to notice the difference, not because she says anything, but because the energy she once gave freely is no longer available to be misused. Her self-respect becomes visible. Her self-worth becomes felt. Her presence becomes stronger. Her boundaries become non-negotiable. And for the first time, she realizes that self-prioritization is the foundation upon which every other form of respect is built. If she does not respect her own boundaries, how will anyone else? If she does not value her own time, how will others? If she does not love herself first, how will anyone learn how to love her? Self-prioritization shapes the standard for every connection in her life. It shows others how she expects to be treated. It teaches them how to show up. It trains them to meet her with the same level of respect. She gives herself. And though some people may resist this new version of her, she begins to understand why. They were benefiting from the version of her that didn't prioritize herself. This realization is painful, but it is also liberating. It frees her from relationships that survived only because she abandoned herself. And in this freedom, she rises. She becomes centered, grounded, aligned, whole. Her energy becomes rooted in truth, not obligation. Her presence becomes confident, not desperate. Her decisions become intentional, not reactive. And just as she begins to anchor herself more deeply, life reveals yet another truth. When you stop seeking value outside yourself, you naturally become valuable to yourself. And this realization begins to carry her into the next awakening. 8. When you stop seeking approval, you become magnetic. When a woman stops living for approval, something magical happens. She becomes magnetic because approval is a quiet thief. It steals her authenticity. It shapes her behavior. It shrinks her truth. It makes her move in ways that don't belong to her. For years, she may have lived in the shadow of external validation, wondering whether her choices were acceptable, whether her voice was too much, whether her dreams were unrealistic, whether her boundaries made her difficult. She may have traded pieces of herself for acceptance that felt temporary and love that felt conditional. But the moment she stops seeking approval, her spirit begins to breathe again. She starts choosing what feels right, not what looks right. She starts speaking from the heart, not from fear. She starts trusting her inner voice over the noise of other people's opinions. And slowly, she becomes herself again. There is something profoundly attractive about a woman who no longer needs permission to exist. Her energy feels free. Her presence feels grounded. Her decisions feel aligned. Her voice feels authentic. People feel drawn to her because she is no longer seeking them. She is standing in herself. Approval was once the anchor that held her down, but now self-trust becomes her compass. She begins to realize that approval was never what she needed. What she truly needed was acceptance from herself. She needed to know that she was enough. Even when others didn't understand her, she needed to feel that her worth was inherent. Even when others didn't acknowledge it, she needed to trust that her path was valid. Even when others couldn't see where it would lead. And in releasing the need for approval, she gained something far more valuable: authenticity. She becomes honest with herself. She becomes aligned with her desires. She becomes brave in her decisions. She becomes free in her expression. This freedom is magnetic. It draws opportunities, healthy connections, and meaningful experiences into her life effortlessly. Because when she stops chasing validation, she becomes validation to herself. And just when this new sense of freedom begins to settle, she discovers one more profound truth. Your authenticity becomes powerful, but it becomes unstoppable when everything that feeds your pain is removed, and this leads her into the next R. Evolution. 9. Silence breaks cycles that words could never change. Silence is a healer. Silence is a revealer. Silence is a cycle breaker. There are patterns in life that words cannot fix. No matter how long she explains, how deeply she describes her pain, how gently she expresses her needs. Some cycles exist because people refuse to hear her. Some continue because her explanations fall on closed hearts. Some repeat because her voice is drowned out by someone else's ego, fear, or denial. But silence creates a shift that words never could. When she becomes silent, she stops feeding the cycle. She stops engaging in the same exhausting conversations. She stops offering emotional labor to people who take but never give. She stops giving chances to behaviors that never change. Her silence becomes a boundary, a shield, a turning point. It disrupts the pattern. It interrupts the familiar. It removes the comfort others once felt in mistreating or misunderstanding her. Suddenly, the cycle has nothing to fuel it, nothing to hold it together, nothing to keep it alive. Her silence makes people sit with themselves, with their guilt, their neglect, their mistakes, their choices, and in that quiet, they confront what her words could never teach them. Some begin to reflect, some begin to crumble, some begin to regret, some even begin to grow. But more importantly, she begins to heal. Her silence becomes the space where her spirit finally has room to breathe. It becomes the place where her wounds begin to close. It becomes the moment she chooses peace over participation. Silence does not mean she has given up. Silence means she has grown beyond the need to prove anything. She no longer explains herself to be understood. She no longer repeats herself to be respected. She no longer lowers herself to be accepted. Her silence becomes her strength. Her silence becomes her wisdom. Her silence becomes her freedom. And as she steps fully into this quiet power, she feels the cycle breaking, not with noise, but with clarity. She understands something profound now. What you walk away from in silence is what you rise above in strength. And just as this understanding settles softly in her heart, a new inner voice whispers, the quiet, powerful reminder that leads into her next transformation. This silence you've learned to hold, it's only preparing you for the woman you're becoming next. 10. Eliminate the fear of outgrowing the people you love. There comes a moment in every life when you begin to feel the quiet tug of expansion. A tug so gentle at first you almost mistake it for restlessness. You feel it when you wake up in the morning and your spirit whispers, there is more. You feel it in the conversations that once energized you, but now weigh your soul with a heaviness you cannot explain. You feel it when the rooms that used to feel comforting start to feel a bit too small, a bit too familiar, a bit too tight around the edges of who you are becoming. And yet, with this tug comes a fear we rarely talk about. The fear that becoming more means leaving behind the people you love. Not because you want to, not because you stopped caring, but because growth reshapes the landscape of your inner world. We are taught to be loyal to family, to friends, to the version of ourselves everyone learned to recognize. But no one teaches us that loyalty can also become a cage, that the very love we cherish can sometimes ask us to shrink so others don't feel the discomfort of our evolution. So you try to stay the same. You try to bend yourself backward, sideways, smaller, molding your spirit into shapes that no longer fit who you are. And for a moment, it seems to work. Everyone is comfortable, no one is threatened. But deep down, you feel the ache of living in a skin that no longer belongs to you. And then comes the guilt. What if growing means hurting them? What if changing means they feel abandoned? What if I lose the relationships I worked so hard to build? But here is the truth your soul has been waiting for you to hear. You do not outgrow people because you stopped loving them. You outgrow people because you finally started loving yourself. Growth is not an act of betrayal. Staying small is. The people who truly love you will never ask you to dim you. Are light so they can feel more comfortable in their shadows. They will never resent you for choosing the path your soul was born to walk. They will never feel threatened by your transformation. They will feel inspired by it. But those who fear their own growth will fear yours. They will cling to the version of you they can understand. And when they see you rising, they might try to anchor you back into the familiar patterns that make them feel safe. Yet you cannot save anyone by staying the same. You can only suffocate yourself trying. So breathe, grow, expand. Allow yourself to evolve without apologizing for the courage it takes to become more. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do, even for them, is to rise so boldly that they begin to see what is possible for themselves. And if you lose people along the way, understand this: you are not losing them. You are releasing the versions of them that were never meant to walk with your future. And that is not failure. That is alignment. And alignment always leads you to the next truth. The truth that growth not only shifts your relationships, but also reveals the limits you once placed on yourself. Because once you stop fearing outgrowing others, you begin to see how often you feared the very power rising within you. 11. Eliminate the fear of being more powerful than you once believed. There is a strange moment in a person's journey when they catch a glimpse of who they could become. And instead of feeling excited, they feel afraid. Afraid of their own capacity, afraid of their own wisdom, afraid of their own strength. It feels almost unreal, like staring into a mirror that reflects not your past, but your potential. The reflection is brighter, bolder, fuller, and that kind of truth can be startling, because for so long you were taught to fear your own greatness. You were taught to dim your intensity, soften your voice, quiet your brilliance. You were taught to believe your power was too much for others, for the world, and sometimes even for yourself. But understand this: the fear you feel isn't a sign that your power is dangerous. It's a sign that your old identity is shaking. Because when you begin to grow into who you truly are, everything you once believed about yourself trembles. The doubts, the insecurities, the self-limiting thoughts. They all rise to the surface one last time, not to stop you, but to test your commitment to becoming more. Power has never been the enemy. Your misunderstanding of it has. You see, power is not the loud, forceful energy the world often portrays. It is not dominance. It is not control. It is not ego. True power is quiet. It is steady. It is born in moments of self-respect, self-awareness, and self-honesty. Power is the ability to choose yourself without guilt. Power is the ability to walk away from what breaks your spirit. Power is the ability to remain soft in a world that praises hardness. Power is the ability to be fully present, fully awake, and fully aligned. And you have always had this power within you. You were simply taught to fear the parts of you that did not fit inside someone else's comfort. But as you rise, you begin to understand that your power isn't something you create. It's something you uncover. You peel away layers of doubt. You shed the stories that were never yours. You release the beliefs that made you smaller. Every moment of healing brings you closer to the truth. You are far more capable, far more resilient, and far more intuitive than you were ever allowed to believe. And yes, stepping into that truth feels overwhelming at first. Because once you claim your power, you can no longer pretend you are powerless. Once you embrace your strength, you can no longer hide behind excuses. You acknowledge your potential, You can no longer settle for less than you deserve. Power demands responsibility, not to others but to your own soul. And that responsibility leads you into a new kind of life. A life where you no longer chase validation. A life where you no longer live for applause. A life where you no longer need external permission to honor your inner wisdom. Because once you embrace the quiet force within you, something beautiful begins to happen. You stop explaining yourself to people who refuse to understand. You stop shrinking to fit the expectations of those who never expanded for themselves. You stop fearing your light, because you finally realize it was meant to guide you, not shame you. But what happens when you stop fearing your greatness? What happens when you grow so deeply that people no longer recognize the version of you they once knew? You begin to face the next truth, the truth that not everyone is meant to understand the evolution you fought so hard to embrace. 12. Eliminate the need to be understood by everyone. There comes a day when you look around and realize that no matter how beautifully you grow, someone will always misunderstand you. Someone will question you. Someone will judge you. Someone will misinterpret your boundaries as arrogance, your silence as coldness, your clarity as defiance. And for a long time, this hurts, because as humans we crave understanding, the way flowers crave sunlight. We want to be seen. We want to be known. We want to be accepted for who we truly are. But the truth is simple and sometimes painful. Not everyone has the capacity to understand your transformation. Some people can only interpret you through the lens of the past. Others can only see you through the limits of their own healing. And some were only meant to understand the chapter in which they entered your life, not the chapters that follow. So you release the need to explain yourself. You stop trying to prove your intentions. You stop trying to justify your boundaries. You stop trying to convince others that your growth is not an attack on their comfort. Because when you try to make everyone understand you, you scatter your energy into hands that were never meant to hold your truth. Instead, you learn the sacred art of letting people think what they want and continuing your journey anyway. You realize that understanding is not a requirement for respect, that agreement is not a requirement for peace, that validation is not a requirement for worthiness. You begin to trust your own voice more than you fear their opinions. You begin to honor your own path more than you crave their approval. And in that shift, something powerful happens. You become free. Free from needing to be liked. Free from needing to be accepted. Free from needing to be understood. Your life becomes quieter but richer, smaller but deeper, simpler but more meaningful. Because the moment you stop chasing understanding from others, you create room for a deeper understanding within yourself. And that inner understanding leads you toward the next evolution, the next chapter, the next unfolding of who you are becoming. A chapter in which you finally step into the fullness of your journey. A chapter where you no longer need permission, applause, or applause. A chapter where you rise into a life that reflects the truth of your soul. Because once you stop needing to be understood, you begin to live in a way that only your future will fully reveal. 13. Eliminate the illusion that you need permission to transform. There comes a moment in every person's life when the desire to change becomes louder than the fear of staying the same. It rises slowly, like dawn light spilling across a quiet landscape. At first, you ignore it. You tell yourself it's just a phase, a mood, a passing wave of discomfort. But deep down, something sacred has already begun, the awakening of who you were always meant to become. And yet, before that transformation has the chance to take shape, most of us wait. We wait for approval. We wait for validation. We wait for someone to say, yes, you may change now. Yes, you may evolve. Yes, you may outgrow what no longer fits you. But here is the truth. No one is coming to grant you permission to become your truest self. No one is coming to release you from the past you have outlived. No one is coming to tell you that you are allowed to rise. We are conditioned from childhood to seek permission for everything. permission to speak, permission to move, permission to take up space. And without realizing it, we carry that conditioning into adulthood. We begin to wait for permission to heal, permission to choose ourselves, permission to step away from what breaks our spirit, permission to stop carrying what is too heavy for our heart. We wait and wait and wait, not noticing that life has been whispering the same message all along. You were born with permission, permission to shift, permission to grow, permission to evolve into someone your past can no longer recognize. But because we have been taught to shrink, we often silence that whisper. We turn away from the door of transformation because it feels too wide, too open, too full of unknowns. We tell ourselves that if we wait long enough, someone will come along to help us step through it. But transformation doesn't wait. It simply widens the doorway again and again, until eventually you look at the space between who you are and who you could be, and you realize something profound. The only thing standing between you and your next chapter is the belief that you need permission to walk into it. So, many people stay in lives that no longer nourish them because they are afraid of being seen changing. They fear the judgments, the comments, the whispers, the looks. They fear being accused of thinking too highly of themselves. And so, instead of transforming, they freeze themselves in the expectations of others. They dim their ambition so others feel less threatened. They quiet their voice so others remain comfortable. They stay loyal to environments that diminish them, all because they believe leaving would make them appear ungrateful or disobedient. And slowly, quietly, painfully, their spirit begins to suffocate. But when you finally begin to understand that permission was never something the world was supposed to give you, everything changes. When you finally see that no one else can validate the call rising within your soul, you begin to breathe in a new way. You begin to realize that the very life you long for is waiting on the other side of a simple decision. I choose to transform even if no one understands it. Because permission is not external, permission is internal. Permission is the moment you say, I am done apologizing for growing. And when you choose yourself like that, when you stand tall in the clarity of your purpose, something sacred happens. Your transformation becomes unstoppable. You no longer wait for others to be comfortable with your evolution. You no longer shrink to match the smallness someone else expects of you. You no longer ask, is it okay if I become more? You simply become. You become in silence. You become in courage. You become in softness. You become in truth. And the world begins to rearrange itself around the version of you that was buried beneath years of hesitation, doubt, and fear. And when you reach that point, when transformation becomes something you honor instead of something you avoid, another truth begins to emerge. A truth that sits quietly beneath the surface of every healing journey. Transformation requires letting go of what once harmed you, not because you are ungrateful, but because your soul deserves freedom. And that truth leads you directly into the next unfolding. 14. Eliminate the habit of returning to what hurt you. There is a strange pull that exists inside the human heart. A pull that draws us back to the very things that once wounded us. Not because we want the pain again, not because we enjoy the struggle, but because pain, when familiar, can feel safer than peace. It's the paradox of healing. Sometimes you return to what hurt you because it's the only place you ever learned how to feel like yourself. You go back to the relationship that drained your spirit because loneliness feels scarier than toxicity. You go back to the friendships that made you small because being unnoticed feels easier than being misunderstood. You go back to the habits that weakened your soul because growth feels uncomfortable, even when it's good for you. You tell yourself, maybe it will be different this time. You tell yourself, maybe I was the problem. You tell yourself, maybe I'm asking for too much. And so, you return, you try again, you bend again. You explain yourself again, until eventually, a quiet realization settles over you. Not loud, not dramatic, not painful, just clear. Returning to what hurt you doesn't heal you. It only reopens the wounds you were meant to outgrow. Healing requires honesty, and the most honest conversation you will ever have is the one you have with yourself when you finally admit that some places cannot give you the safety you crave. Some people cannot love you in a way that honors who you are. Some chapters cannot be rewritten no matter how many times you revisit them. You were not created to live your whole life, sir. Cling the same heartbreak. You are not created to remain loyal to the things that break you. You are not created to feel pain and call it home. But leaving what hurt you requires courage. It requires breaking the cycle of emotional familiarity. It requires stepping into a new, uncertain space where your soul finally has room to breathe. In healing, the greatest shift happens when you understand this. You do not heal by going back. You heal by going forward. Forward into peace, forward into clarity, forward into new strength and deeper wisdom. But in the beginning, going forward feels like betrayal, not betraying others, betraying the version of yourself that once clung to survival patterns, the version of you who believed love had to be earned through suffering, the version of you who believed loyalty meant self-sacrifice, the version of you who believed returning was safer than starting over. But you are wiser now. You are more awake. You recognize what your heart truly needs. You begin to see that every time you return to what hurt you, you abandon yourself. You silence your intuition. You muffle your spirit. You choose familiarity over growth. But today, you choose differently. You choose to honor yourself. You choose to stop picking up what you worked so hard to put down. You choose to break the emotional habits that tied you to what was never meant for your future. And when you do, something inside you shifts. You begin to feel the weight lifting. You begin to feel the fog clearing. You begin to feel the truth rising. Healing is not about going back. Healing is about rising into the version of yourself that your pain once tried to prevent you from becoming. And yet, something even deeper waits beneath this realization. The understanding that letting go does not only free you from the past, it also frees you from the future you imagined with the WRO. Things. The moment you stop returning to what hurt you, you open the door to a more honest question. A question that leads you into the next evolution of your journey. A question that asks whether you are ready to release the futures that never truly aligned with your soul. 15. The woman who speaks little observes everything. There is a certain kind of woman who does not waste her breath. She does not compete for attention. She does not beg to be understood. She does not fight to prove what her silence already reveals. She is the woman who speaks little, yet sees everything. She watches the world with a steady, grounded awareness, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of quiet truth. You can see this woman in the way she sits, the way she listens, the way her eyes move with intention through conversations that others rush through. Where others react, she notices. Where others assume, she reflects. Where others hurry, she breathes. Her silence is not emptiness. Her silence is full of understanding, full of intuition, full of information gathered not from noise, but from the natural clarity that appears when the mind grows still. She does not speak quickly because she knows something most people forget. Words mean nothing if they come from an uncentered place. So she waits, she listens, she absorbs. She studies not only what is said, but what is unsaid. Not only what is shown, but what is hidden beneath the performance of people's personalities. Most people talk too much because they fear the truth that comes to the surface in silence. But this woman leans into that truth. She trusts it. She knows that silence brings clarity, and clarity brings power. She has learned that every person reveals themselves eventually, even without speaking. You can see the truth in how they react when they are frustrated. You can read their intentions in age, how they treat those who cannot benefit them. You can discover their character in how they handle your silence, whether they respect it or feel threatened by it. And this woman who speaks little, she catches all of it. She notices the shift in tone. She senses the hidden motives. She sees the patterns long before they unfold. Not because she is suspicious, but because she is awake. She has learned that when you become still, the world reveals itself to you. When you stop chasing explanations, people show you who they are. When you stop talking, you start seeing. And the beauty of being this woman is that her silence protects her. It keeps her from overexposing her heart. It shields her from people who do not deserve access to her inner world. It allows her to stay close to her intuition, the inner compass that never lies. This type of woman knows that life is not about winning arguments. It is about preserving her peace. It is about guarding her mind. It is about choosing where she places her energy and who she allows into the space of her soul. By speaking less, she does not become smaller. She becomes sharper, more aware, more connected, more aligned with the quiet truth unfolding in every moment. And the more she observes, the more she realizes something essential. Most of the world is loud because it is confused, but the soul becomes quiet when it knows its worth. Her silence is her grounding. Her observation is her protection. Her awareness is her strength. And yet, beneath all of this, another understanding begins to rise. A truth that whispers to her in the stillness. Silence does not only sharpen observation, it strengthens boundaries. And that truth leads her naturally to her next evolution. Because once you can see everything clearly, you also begin to choose differently. 16. Healing happens when you stop fighting battles. Oh, ego. Once you learn to observe the world without reacting, without rushing, without demanding to be heard, something inside you shifts. A softening, a settling, a return to yourself. You begin to notice that many of the battles you once fought were not battles of the heart, they were battles of ego. You fought to be right. You fought to be chosen. You fought to be valued. You fought to prove your worth to people who never had the capacity to see it. You fought because your ego believed you needed to win, even when winning meant losing yourself. But healing, real healing, begins when you recognize that ego battles drain your spirit far more than they elevate it. You start to see that your peace is more important than being right. Your stability is more important than being understood. Your self-respect is more important than winning the approval of people who would not choose you unless it was convenient for them. And so, slowly, gently, you put your ego down. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop engaging in arguments that only pull you away from your truth. You stop trying to change minds that were never open in the first place. You stop performing for love. You stop begging for attention. You stop justifying your worth. There is a freedom that comes with stepping out of the arena of ego, a freedom that feels like finally being able to breathe again. It's the moment your heart says, I do not have to prove anything anymore. There is peace in that, a kind of peace you didn't know you were missing because you were too busy fighting battles that led nowhere. The more you step away from ego-driven conflict, the more you realize how much energy you have been draining into people, places, and situations that did not deserve another ounce of your spirit. Suddenly, your mind becomes quiet, your heart becomes lighter, your life becomes simpler. You discover that peace has been waiting for you this whole time. You just could not hear it over the noise of your ego demanding recognition. But as your ego softens, your soul steps forward, and your soul operates from a different place entirely. Instead of reacting, it reflects. Instead of defending, it observes. Instead of forcing, it allows. You realize you do not need to fight for love. The right love chooses you naturally. You do not need to argue for your worth. Your worth is inherent. You do not need to compete for respect. People aligned with truth offer it freely. And the moment you stop fighting ego battles, you reclaim your life. You reclaim your inner world. You reclaim your power. You begin to understand that silence is not withdrawal. It is self-protection. It is maturity. It is wisdom. Silence does not mean defeat. Silence means you have finally learned which battles deserve your energy and which ones were never yours to fight. When you release the need to prove anything to anyone, healing accelerates in ways you could never imagine. You gain a new kind of strength, the strength that comes from not needing validation. The strength that comes from listening to your heart instead of your ego. The strength that comes from choosing peace, even when chaos invites you to dance with it. And that strength becomes the foundation of a new life. A quieter life, a wiser life, a life aligned with your deepest truth. And yet, as healing deepens, another realization rises gently to the surface. Healing is not only about stepping away from ego, it is about stepping deeper into yourself. And that truth leads you toward the next unfolding of your journey. Because when you stop fighting unnecessary battles, you finally have the energy to become who you were meant to be. 17. Eliminate identities built from old wounds. There comes a moment in every person's life when they look in the mirror and realize the reflection staring back at them is not who they truly are, but who they became because of pain, not because of truth, not because of destiny, but because of the wounds they never gave themselves permission to heal. We don't always notice when this happens. It's subtle, like dust collecting on a bookshelf. A difficult childhood becomes a personality. A heartbreak becomes a belief system. A betrayal becomes a fear that follows you through every door you enter. And before you know it, you begin to move, speak, react, and choose as if your entire existence is shaped by the very moments that tried to break you. There is a quiet tragedy in that, because wounds are meant to be experienced, not lived inside of. They are meant to pass through you, not define you. But when pain becomes familiar, it feels like safety. When trauma becomes your story, you start performing a role that does not belong to you. And the saddest part is that the world begins to respond to you as the character you've become, not the soul you actually are. You see, every old wound carries a voice. Some whisper, "You're not enough." Some insist, "You must protect yourself from everyone." Some say, "Never be too happy, something will go wrong." And because those voices were born in moments of weakness, they speak with authority they never earned. So today, let me ask you something gently, without judgment. Are you living as who you truly are, or as who the pain taught you to be? Sit with that. Let it echo inside your heart. Let it open a door you've been too afraid to look behind, because the identity built from wounds is heavy. It exhausts you. It limits you. It filters every experience through the lens of fear, mistrust, or unworthiness. You can always tell when someone is living from their wounds. They over-explain, over-defend, overgive, or overthink. They shrink when they should rise. They hold back when they should express. They carry their experiences like armor, not realizing that armor can suffocate a person just as easily as it can protect them. But here's the beautiful part. Identity is not permanent. It is malleable. It is always in motion. And you are allowed, without asking permission, without waiting for the perfect moment, without needing someone else's approval, to choose a new one. You can decide today, I am no longer becoming what hurt me. You can stop rehearsing the old narratives. You can stop repeating patterns that only lead to self-betrayal. You can stop hiding behind masks that make you feel loved, but keep you feeling empty. Healing is not about erasing the past. It is about reclaiming the power it once took from you. It is remembering that your wounds are chapters, not titles, experiences, not definitions, lessons, not cages. And once you make peace with that truth, something shifts. Your posture changes, your voice changes, your expectations change. Your energy becomes softer, lighter, more genuine, because it is finally coming from a place of wholeness, not survival. You begin to walk differently. You begin to breathe differently. You begin to look at the world not as an enemy waiting to hurt you, but as a space waiting to meet the real you. And that version of you, the one beneath the fear, beneath the walls, beneath the years of pretending, is extraordinary. But to reach that version, to truly step into the person you were meant to be, you must first release the identity the pain built for you. And once you do that, once you loosen the grip of those old voices, you will feel something surprising, a silence inside you that is not empty, but peaceful, intentional, full of possibility. And perhaps, just perhaps, that silence is trying to tell you something, a message that leads directly into your next transformation, the one waiting just beyond the noise you've been holding on to for years, a silence that whispers, let go a little more. You are ready. 18. Eliminate the belief that change must be loud to be real. There is a belief many people carry, often without realizing it, the belief that transformation must be dramatic, to be meaningful. We think real change should shake the ground beneath our feet. We think it should arrive like a storm, loud, undeniable, filled with thunder and clarity. We imagine a grand moment, a breakthrough powerful enough to rewrite our entire story in one breath. But life rarely works like that. Real change, deep, lasting, soul-shifting change, almost never announces itself. It does not need applause. It does not seek attention. It does not demand recognition. It begins quietly. It begins the moment you choose to pause before reacting. The moment you choose to walk away from what diminishes you. The moment you decide to speak truth even when your voice trembles. The moment you give yourself permission to rest without guilt. Sometimes change is nothing more than a breath, a single breath, taken in awareness instead of fear. And yet, that small breath becomes the beginning of a new life. People misunderstand quiet change because subtle shifts do not feel powerful at first. A thought, a pause, a boundary, a new habit, a moment of self-respect. These things feel too small to matter until they begin to change everything. The truth is, the loud transformations, they burn fast, they fade quickly. They are fueled by impulse instead of intention. But the quiet ones, the ones built in the silence of your heart, in the privacy of your thoughts, in the soft decision to choose differently, they are the ones that last. You do not need a crisis to transform. You do not need a breakdown to break free. You do not need the world to witness your growth in order for it to be real. You can evolve gently. You can change softly. You can rise quietly. And that rise, that soft, graceful unfolding is often more powerful than any loud declaration ever could be. Because it is rooted not in fear, not in urgency, but in truth. You are not becoming someone new. You are returning to who you were before the world told you who to be. And that return is sacred. So allow your transformation to be gentle. Let it be slow. Let it be invisible for a while. You owe no one a performance of your healing. You are allowed to grow in the places no one sees. You are allowed to walk away from the noise and choose peace quietly. You are allowed to take the small steps that your old self never believed were enough. And soon, without realizing it, you will look back and see that the quiet decisions were the ones that rebuilt you. But there is something even deeper waiting beneath this truth, something you may not have considered yet, that the quietness of real change does not mean it is weak. It means it is preparing you for a new chapter, a new identity, a new level of inner clarity. Something is about to unfold within you, a shift so subtle, yet so life-changing, that it will reshape the way you see everything that comes next. So, as you walk back into your life after this moment, remember this. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to fight to be respected. And you don't need to explain to be understood. Your silence is a mirror. It reflects truth. It reveals intentions. It rearranges the world around you without a single word spoken. When a woman focuses inward, the universe focuses on her, and when she becomes still, everything else rises to meet her. So be still, be silent, be self-focused, and watch, quietly, gracefully, as everything begins to fall into place.